I have finally bought one of my Grail watches. It's a Rolex. Of course it's a Rolex, but I bought it off eBay. So let's see what's actually turned up. This is, as I mentioned, one of my Grail watches, but as Grail watches go, this is relatively affordable. And it's relatively affordable because it's one of the most underrated Rolexes, one of the most undesired Rolexes as well. I wanted a vintage watch for a long time. That's where my watch journey started. I feel like I've gone down this route of buying very modern watches, and I want to get back into vintage. And when I was shopping for watches, I actually already had an idea of what I wanted in mind. I've got a big crush on Cartier, especially the Cartier Santos Curry. This is a reference 2661 from the 80s, and I absolutely love this watch. Epically cool. I don't know when I'd get to wear this watch. I don't feel like I'm cool enough to be a Cartier wearer. Another choice is the Speedmaster, the Omega Speedmaster. I feel like it's only a matter of time that I get myself a Speedmaster. I keep putting it off because I feel like it's such an obvious choice to have. They're common as hell, but they're common because they're popular, and they're popular because they're stunning. They are just outright sexy watches. My challenge around the Omega Speedmaster is that there's so many different variants. If you know any good references, vintage or modern, drop a comment, let me know what you think. But I went back to my safe space, Rolex. Oh look, time has come to get back into vintage watches. This was bought off eBay, so this is a vintage Rolex off eBay, and this is sponsored by eBay. I promise you that I'm gonna show you exactly how the watch has come from their authentication center. Part of their authentication guarantee. That's one of, let's get this stuff out of the way. That's one of the big benefits of buying a watch off eBay is the fact that they have this authentication guarantee. It basically means that before you buy the watch, provided that the listing has this little blue tick that says this listing is part of the authentication guarantee, when you buy the watch, it gets shipped off to their authentication center where watch geeks analyze the watch and make sure that everything within the watch is authentic or in line with what the listing says. For example, if a watch is said to come with the box and papers, they make sure that it has the box and papers. That's quite easy for these guys because this is a vintage watch that has no box and papers, so it comes in this little travel pouch. And it has a little eBay authentication guarantee card. On the back, you can see all the details of my watch. Pretty cool, huh? Anyway, let's get to the watch. I did a video on this watch about 5 years ago saying that this was one of my Grail watches. So welcome back to Bark and Jack. I'm Adrian, and today we're talking about the Rolex Turnograph. It's kind of the black sheep of the Rolex family. It's also a very significant watch for Rolex. And here she is. This is the Rolex DateJust Turnograph. This one is from 1960s, I think 1966 to be exact. And she's a beauty. I mean, I don't like the strap that it comes on, but that doesn't really matter. No returns if removed. Before you rip the tag off, do make sure you inspect the watch to ensure that it is exactly what you wanted it to be. And this is exactly what I wanted it to be. I think this is one of the most underrated Rolexes out there at the moment still, for two reasons. Firstly, I think this is so damn hot. But secondly, and the more important reason that I think this is underrated, is because this holds a title for being first for Rolex in so many different categories. This was the first sports Rolex. This was the first Rolex that had a rotating bezel, and it was the first Rolex sports watch to be made in a precious metal. This watch was launched in 1953 with the reference 6202, and it looked like this. 1 year later, in 1954, Rolex launched the Submariner with the reference 6204. So the Turnograph was the Submariner, the original Submariner, before the Submariner, which is pretty epic. Quite soon after the Submariner took over the title or the name of the Turnograph was then pushed into the DateJust family, and that's where it sat for the rest of its life. Being confused. Is it a sports watch? Is it a dress watch? It's got the rotating bezel of a dive watch of the Submariner, but it has the dressy, more formal look of a DateJust, and it always had this weird middle ground of not really being sporty, not really being dressy, and it got more and more weird throughout its lifetime until Rolex put it out of its misery in the year 2011. And that's when it looked like this. That's quite understandable why Rolex discontinued it. It was weird. But this version I absolutely love. I'm a big fan of the DateJust, as like many people are, but I like watches that are slightly different. And this has that element of being slightly different. It's got more of a history than the DateJust. It's got more of a story than the DateJust. But this steel case with the yellow gold bezel, I love it, especially with the massive vintage vibes that it has, because it is legitimate vintage. It's not neo-vintage, this is just outright vintage. I wanted this version because of mainly the handset. The handset and the bezel for me are the big shining points of this watch. I love it when gold gets aged, and this has a really nice amount of aging on the bezel. It isn't completely worn out like some are, and it isn't completely crisp, because I want that vintage look about it. The handset, these are alpha hands. Typically, DateJust watches have baton hands. The really early versions of this watch have these alpha hands, and I love them. The glass is acrylic glass, so this is going to scratch very easily, but that is pretty much the same for all vintage watches. The case is a normal Oyster DateJust case. It's 36mm wide, it's got 20mm lugs, and it has these beautifully curved edges to it as well. There is no quick set date function in the watch, you just have to keep winding it manually. The movement feels so smooth, which is quite amazing for a watch that is, wow, nearly 60 years old. I don't like the strap this thing comes on, but luckily, watches of this era have lug holes, making it very easy to change the strap on. Luckily, I know a guy who makes straps as well. That is super hot. See, I love vintage watches. This cost me about 3,600, I think it was, which is still a lot of money, but within the Rolex world, I don't think it is. But that's one of the reasons why I think these watches are, I wouldn't say a bargain, certainly underrated. That's so good looking. I think there's a lot of different definitions of Grail watches. I think for most people, a Grail watch is something that is so far out of reach financially, or is just super rare for them to get. And actually for me, this has been quite a rare watch. There aren't many of these watches around. The super rare ones are the white dials, or even rarer are the blue dials. This, like many Rolexes and like many watches, has a nickname. This was called the Thunderbird because this was made for, not this version, this version that you can see. This was made for the Thunderbird US Air Force demonstration team that was founded in 1953. Just like the original version of this watch. Guys, what do you think of this watch, the Rolex Chronograph? But also, do you have like an obtainable Grail watch that you just haven't pulled the trigger on? Drop your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button. If you like the style of this video, and hit the subscribe button down there and that little bell icon so you get notifications when I drop a new video. If you're on Instagram, give me a follow at BarkerandJack, and give me a follow at Adrian Barker, and I'll see you very soon. Take care. Let me go enjoy my watch.